Welcome to Just Relationships, the show that offers you concrete ways to make your relationships better. Whether it's your boss, your spouse, your children, or your friends, the quality of your relationships in life directly affects how you feel about yourself and the success you achieve. Your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer, a psychotherapist, telecoach, author, and seminar leader, will interview top experts to help you learn to manage this essential part of your life. And now, here's your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer.
Greetings to you. Do you sometimes feel that life is too much of a struggle and it feels too overwhelming and too exhausting, and you might want to just stay under the covers? Well, I've had that feeling myself. I would like to offer you a positive reframe of how to look at struggle, and how to get to the other side and be stronger for it. And I'm very happy to bring back to you Dr. Frank Pasciuti, who is the author of Chrysalis, Crisis: How Life's Ordeals Can Lead to Personal and Spiritual Transformation. So rather than have you explain all over again, Dr. Pasciuti, because this is part 2 of a 2-part series, I just want to, I love that word chrysalis. It's not in the vernacular. Cocoon certainly is. So is the cocoon the outside and the chrysalis what actually happens to the caterpillar?
Yeah,
is that the distinction?
Yeah, I think it speaks more to the process.
Okay.
And the transformation, the metamorphosis process. And the cocoon is the place where it takes place, and then the caterpillar actually goes through that and comes out a butterfly. And there's the transformation. It's a beautiful symbol. It's used by the Greeks, Saint Teresa and John of the Cross. The early Greeks used the same word for butterfly as they did for soul.
Oh, really?
Which I thought was interesting. Yeah, isn't that neat?
I did not know that.
It's a spiritual symbol that a lot of people employ, talking about, the dark night of the soul would be, and then coming out of that, and, the transformative process, which oftentimes, unfortunately, there's a lot of, there's always going to be some suffering in life, and change is, a constant. So sometimes they come together at the same time.
Wow. Is there a way, I wonder, to look inside the cocoon to actually see how the caterpillar becomes the butterfly?
You know what? I wish I could tell you more about that, but I have a feeling that if you did, it probably would end up, because sometimes, and I even make this point, sometimes something does happen to the cocoon. And like I draw the same thing, that sometimes some crises are, overwhelming, and we don't recover. It's not like every one is, like recoverable and, is like turning lemons into lemonade. But even with the butterfly, something may block the cocoon, or insects may devour it, and, and that's sad, but it happens.
Right. Got it. And I'm thinking about in the Chinese, what do they call those little pictographs, those little symbols that crisis actually has 2 of those little tiny pictures, and one stands for danger and the other opportunity. And exactly. Yeah, and because of our primitive brains and our permanent alarm system, we are looking at the threat and the fear, and focusing on that. And I wonder, do you think that at the same time one can also think about the opportunity, or that's more of a progression?
Yeah, no, excellent. That's exactly right what you just said. I do think it would be premature. If somebody came in a crisis with me to see me as a therapist, I would want to address it and how they're doing, how they're feeling. But when they start moving through it, and I feel like a significant amount of healing has taken place, they seem to be out of the initial, trauma of the experience, I might pivot with them and say, so, what do you think? What is this experience awakened you to? What is this brought forth in terms of your awareness of yourself, in terms of your areas of growth that maybe you had not considered before until this experience was thrust upon you? So that but it has to be, I think you have to time that right, or it could sound too intellectual. Somebody may need to just feel angry or do some crying, or just need to just vent and diffuse and just adjust to their new life circumstances if it's been real significant before they're ready to move into okay, what can I glean out of this for growth? But it can be done.
Beautiful. And I know in the last show you were talking about you really have to have the experience to move into kind of a feeling of the spirit within you. It's not just talking therapy. But I like that question, the way you question that. What does this experience awaken you to? So that is a great way of putting it. So I'm going to use that in my therapy session.
It wasn't coined by me. I got news for you.
Yes,
What I know, I stand on the shoulders of others, believe me.
For
I
sure.
have experienced it myself, so I don't come away. I'm not sure. Certainly have had my crises in life, and I can look back and say, wow, that was painful at the time, but when I look back, it really opened me up to areas that I had not been alerted to beforehand.
I know. And in retrospect, and I say that to my clients and students regularly, when you're thinking about writing the book of your life and, the next chapter, when you know that a next chapter has started, I bet that pivotal time was not very pretty. I bet there was a lot going on there for you. And again, to reframe that, so when we have future crises, we can say, I did it before, I can do it again. And that's one reason why teen suicide is so much higher than adult suicide. Because we adults know that, been there, done that, got through it, whereas teens can look at it as, this is my life, and this is my life forever. I'm not getting out of this, so I'd rather die. Yeah, for sure. It's hard to have perspective when your sampling of life is so limited. But that's great. And even though I certainly abide by this theory and try to uphold it, I know when I have crises, I do ask myself, let me deal with this, but what's to be learned? Why am I having this experience? What might this be teaching me right now? And try to open up to that. There's where you go in for inner guidance, and you try to listen to your own higher self and try to ask those questions and see what comes into awareness. Yeah, so tell us what you mean, Dr. Frank Pasciuti, about the higher self. As we may call it, the transpersonal self. Can you say that? Sure.
I think there's a wisdom in each of us. I do think we have, to take a philosophic approach, there's a concept called panentheism, which is a way of looking at consciousness. And I think everything around us, I'm a believer in consciousness, and I don't mean conscious. I mean consciousness as what Jung would call the unus mundus, or the one ground that gives rise to everything, both physical and mental, everything, emotional. So when I look at these concepts, or these 10 areas that I identify, they're all what I call capacities of consciousness that are experienced within the range or realm of humanity. And animals and plants and everything else have our expressions of consciousness to varying degrees, but we have the ability to look within ourselves. Now, I think there's also ranges that are above us. There are expanded, greater bandwidth, you might say, to be able to pull in more information. And so when I think of the higher self, I think of trying to learn to listen to the inner wisdom that's available. Like there's a source of, consciousness is all around us, within us. And if we can learn ways of putting ourselves in a receptive state to be able to register this kind of information and guidance, there's where I feel, you're listening to your higher self, but it's turning within. It's like what Jesus said, or it's within us. And so learning to be still and listen to that inner voice many times. I mean, it needs to be dusted off sometimes if it's being distorted, but many times you'll get that guidance and you'll learn to trust it over time.
I'm also trained in Gestalt therapy, and I know that, Fritz Perls talked about meditation more as listening. And so much of meditation has to do with, you see a thought, put it in a cloud, blow it away. And the idea of listening and finding that inner voice, that still voice inside. And how do I know God's will? And we can use the word God in a broader way. You also, you also distinguish in your book the difference between religiousness and spirituality. So would you speak a little bit to that, Dr. Frank Pasciuti?
Sure. Sure. I think of spirituality or spirit, experiences of spirit, is a direct experience you might have, where religious is learning beliefs that have been passed down by various religions or customs or rituals. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when I talk about spiritual development, I'm talking about learning to awaken to what you might say are experiences of spirit. So one might be learning that that you do have awareness outside of your body, and that starts talking about survival, or that if somebody, more people than you realize have out-of-body experiences. I've worked with women who've been abused. Well, they'll say, when I was being abused, I was looking at it happening to me from up in the corner of a room. Mm-hmm. Or, people who have near-death experiences with an out-of-body component. They'll say, I was on an operating table, they had blindfolds over my eyes, and I was unconscious and flatlining, but I saw, and it was verified, physicians or surgeons doing certain things, and everybody would say to me, how could you know that? You were completely unconscious. So there's a lot of ways in which, one has direct experience of spirit, and by that I mean just consciousness as it, an awareness of that. So we have consciousness even when we're sleeping, but we're unconscious to it, right? Mm-hmm. So it gets a little kind of like, it sounds a little like redundant, but you can have unconscious consciousness, or you can be aware. And that's what all meditation is about, being aware, greater and greater extensive awareness. And certainly I identify that in the book as the number one technique I would use. But you know what I want to say? These key areas that I talk about, first I do a run-through and I talk about how they can all be developed, and, the more conventional way in which we look at emotional development or taking charge of our physical world, both in terms of our bodies or our finances and everything. But when you start taking those keys to a higher octave, as I refer to them, they can serve putting us in states of mind or in ways where we can tune into the very subtle nature of these intuitive and spiritual experiences. But you might look at belief. You might say, okay, well, or you might look at identity. You may say, well, I'm not that kind of a person. I could never do that. Or you may say, well, if you don't, there's a lot of research, for instance, in psychic phenomena where they've done real rigorous testing and controls, where they've shown where people who don't believe in these experiences, they don't have them. And they have, interestingly, they have what they call experiences that are significant in the opposite direction. Not only so, it's called psi missing or a sheep coat effect. But so there's an element of saying, let's go back and look at how do I need to be when I meditate. One is I don't want to be aware of my physical body, right? When I get lost in that state of mind, I want to be mind awake, body asleep, but I'm still alert. I want to not be thinking a lot, so I need to clear my mind, and that's hard to do. Or I want to not have unconscious or emotional perturbances going on, so if I haven't really worked with learning how to still my emotional world, then it's going to also intrude when I'm meditating. Or morally, if I'm guilty, or if I have feelings where I'm constantly ruminating about things I've done wrong, if I have a conscience, that could break in when I'm still. Or, there's ways in which some of these other areas too, may undermine our ability to just be still and allow ourselves to register those higher transpersonal functions.
So that's a lot. That's a lot to digest. And I'm thinking that what helps me a great deal is just free writing. Just taking a pen to a paper and starting to write. And if I make a deal with myself beforehand that I will rip it up afterwards, so I can free my subconscious to know nobody absolutely will ever read it, so I can say hello to my lower self, say hello to my shadow, and allow it to be and allow it to come forward. So I find that that's a great vehicle. What do you think about that?
Oh, I think that's wonderful. People, have you ever read of any Ira Progoff, who was a protege of Jung, talked about his whole, and Judith Cameron?
Right, the morning pages, right.
Yeah, right. And so, and keeping a journal, like I actually have handouts on meditation and journaling and tell people, this is not a diary. This is you getting in touch with that inner voice of yourself. And if you start going with it, you'll be surprised that what will come through will be new information to you, but it's from you. And so I really do encourage those who are so inclined. Some people are, some people aren't. But I certainly have kept a journal over many years and found that when I was writing it, it was like, wow, I entered that process not aware of where I was going to end up. So it can be very therapeutic, and certainly I think it can be used as an adjunct to therapy, or just one's own efforts at trying to get inside oneself and learn about some higher aspects or anything that's going on.
And I do tell my clients and students that if I didn't have a lot of time and I had to choose between free writing and journal writing, I would pick free writing. And I often advise people that if you allow yourself to, that you will destroy it afterwards. You can always transfer some things over, some gems of wisdom that you want to keep. For me, the only problem with journal writing is if it's pretty and it's in a book, and someone might read it, you can lose.
Start editing it.
Yeah, start editing it. You can lose some edge.
I agree. That's really good. I like what you're saying, and I'm going to have to incorporate, if you don't mind me, taking some of what you're teaching me here. No, that's a great qualifier, because I do think you're right. I do think if you imagine someday, even if you die, your children are going to find your journal, you're going to already start writing it a little bit, maybe unintentionally or even unconsciously for your audience or who might read it, rather than saying, I just want to bring out what's within me. And, once it passes through by awareness, I've gained what I wanted to achieve. And if I destroy it, if there's something I want to develop more, I can just write that idea down like a dream. But no, that's great.
Oh,
I like that idea.
I'm so glad you like it, because that's what I tell my clients and students. It can be X-rated, and my free writing looks like a nut wrote it. It's all scrolls, and it's this and it's that, and I know what it means, and nobody else could even understand it, even if they did see it. I wonder if one can be spiritual and experience spirit without necessarily going into psychic phenomena. And I want to ask you very specifically, after my father died, I said, please, Dad, give me a sign that you're present, you're here in spirit and all of that. And I asked and asked and asked for days and weeks and months and years and never got it. And I personally have never had a psychic phenomenon, even though I've been curious and wanted one. And I'm thinking about Bill Wilson, the co-founder of AA, and he talks about, his room, the whole room lit up, and he was filled with the most wonderful peace. And that was his version of spiritual awakening, which helped him to not have to drink alcohol any longer. And I've never had it. And I think that one can have like a sudden spiritual awakening or a gradual spiritual awakening, would you say?
Sure. I think you're making a very good point. I mean, these are not things, I would imagine that maybe our capacity is to be able to abide in places of bliss, in places where we're feeling connected at that level, like a unity experience, but most people don't sustain them. And there's a Hindu man by the name of Sri Aurobindo who said, these higher, you can have a higher state experience like that, but typically you'll return to your baseline. And he said it's a gift that that exists and you'll never forget it. But he says, it's a process of learning how to augment the ground. And Jack Kornfield, who was I did some training with him at one point, talked about after the ecstasy, the laundry.
Yes, exactly.
Life. And you would like to say, I would like to be able to stay in that state of bliss or that mystical experience. But it's hard to sustain. I think it may be maybe down the road, but it would take a lot of development. And even but I don't think you need to have. In the Hindu and Buddhist, in some of the spiritual traditions, they'll say as you get more attuned to your inner world, you will register experiences like premonitions or precognitions, things like that. But not to get caught up in that, because it's not about like, hey, I'm so cool, I had a dream and it happened. That would be ego jumping in, and that's not the idea there. It's more, it could be a sign that I'm starting to be able to maintain an awareness or maintain a state of mind that allows me to register these subtleties, but I go back to working on myself. But having an experience like you had, I mean, that's a beautiful experience, and I think that is a spiritual experience. And people have all kinds, but they may not have others. And so it's sometimes, if somebody, I've had numbers of people say they felt that they were not wishful thinking, but they beheld the spirit of somebody they loved who died. There's a lot of research to show that happens a lot, and they think they're losing their mind. So they may come forward and approach this program at University of Virginia called the Division of Perceptual Studies, where they study reincarnation and mediumship and near-death experiences and all that. And you know, they don't do therapy there, so they'll refer them to me. And they come in very cautious, like, I don't know if you're going to think I should be put away if I tell you this, but I had this experience. And so I just honor it. And they, you know, if they, you know, usually are not psychotic and delusional or trying to, you know, fraudulently present themselves as something that they're not. But, you know, a lot of people have these experiences and don't talk about them, because I think somewhere there's a strong undercurrent or unconscious awareness that people used to get burnt at the stake, or people used to get like marginalized, or certainly our profession, people are very cautious. I was cautious for years to talk about some of these areas because I wanted to be recognized as a solid conventional psychotherapist. But over time and more learning and research, I realized, you know, our founder of American psychology, William James, started along with Frederick Myers, the first psychics organization in the late 1800s, and he's the father of psychology. So, you know, there's people out there who are credible, who are opening to these experiences. And so it requires that we have, and this is what I attempt to do with the book, how do we explain them and how do we put them in perspective as an area of development so that they're not looked at as abnormal, because many times they're not. And one of the things that Frederick Myers distinguished, he says, well, they're not normal either, because not a lot of people have them, but they're not abnormal. So he gave them the name supernormal. He said, and so I look at that and I say, on one side, they're kind of exceptional experiences. You know, that's an exceptional experience you had with your dad.
Mm-hmm. Oh, but I didn't have it. I just asked for it and I wanted it and I didn't.
Oh, I thought you said you did. You
no,
did. Well,
you
know what?
not.
I still think it's within your potential to connect and do that. Yeah, you gotta.
Dad, are you listening? Dad, are you listening?
Yeah. Sometimes, you know what's an interesting thing? Fear. There's more fear of that dimension.
Yes.
Than a lot of people realize, and fear keeps it away.
Yes.
You know, the more you can learn about it, the more you can truly be still and make connections and have these experiences. But a lot of people are afraid, and that inhibits it.
Yeah.
And,
so the idea that energy never dies, right? Energy just transforms. That kind of thing. Yeah. So
Einstein said it, and I believe him.
Right. I believe Einstein. Anything he says. Yeah. So that does involve a belief in reincarnation. Would you say? Well,
I tend to favor that belief, but it sort of was presented to me early in my life, so I had a lot of opportunities to contemplate about it throughout most of my life. But there's research, and one of the things that drew me to where I live in Charlottesville, Virginia, at the University of Virginia, is a department where they have done, you know, over 50 years of research, for example, on children who have memories of past lives, and have done really tight, controlled research where kids were coming up with images and memories they could not have possibly known from anybody around them, but they just registered them. And so, you know, when I started hearing about that, it started getting to be more than just a belief in reincarnation, like you might come to be exposed to in Buddhism or Hinduism or, you know, some of the other cultures that embrace that belief. Even Catholicism at one time had a belief in reincarnation, but it was suppressed at one point. At about 300 years after Jesus, they felt it was too threatening. There's some research on it to say that, you know, if you start getting people thinking about they're going to come back, we want them to be invested in this life, and who knows how it can go off the rails. So they stopped teaching it. But there's a couple of books out there called When Jesus Taught About Reincarnation. But the idea here is development, the trajectory of development and evolution may occur over lifetimes. It's like, where does memory reside? Where does the energy go? What survives? Is it awareness? How is consciousness? Does it modify itself when it's out of physicality? And so there's a lot of questions about that. But there's a lot of research about it too.
Yes, that's so interesting. And I'm interested in spiritual development and really experiencing that higher self and hearing, as you say, that still inner voice and knowing what the higher self, my higher self, how my higher self is connected to all there is, to the cosmos, and how one accesses that extra special wisdom, if you will. And I don't experience it as much as I would like.
Sure. Well, I think keep seeking. I mean, I am too, but I do believe, and actually there is pretty good research even on brain, like brain research these days, to show that there are certain states of consciousness that are more conducive to having those experiences. And they can, use an EEG or an fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imagery, to show that there are areas in the brain that are, it's not like they cause the experience, but they do seem to emit heat as in an fMRI or electricity as an EKG when those experiences are had. Unfortunately, if you have too much entrenchment in a physicalist belief, they'll say, well, we can cause that to happen, but really it's correlational. And when you do, brain research on long-term meditators, for instance, there's areas of the brain that show a significant quieting, like the cerebral cortex, you would say, well, they're just not processing stuff. So they're open to these other dimensions coming through and registering. So you can, I think meditation and other methods like your writing approach, any way you can bring the inside out is going to open you more and more to experiences like that.
Beautiful. And we have just a moment, Dr. Frank Pisciutti, and I'm just wondering, I've read in David Hawkins when he talks about the higher vibrations, higher levels of frequency, and, the highest of the highest, like Jesus and Mahatma Gandhi and Buddha, all of that versus the lower level. So you would ascribe to that, I imagine.
Absolutely. And if you look at the chapter I have where I have a what I call a cosmological map of panentheist, a panentheist notion of how consciousness works, there are evolved stages where I think, and even Jesus said, it is through me. You have to go through the Christ consciousness, if you will, because it was Jesus the Christ, right? And the Buddha consciousness. Those are high levels of spirit consciousness that are available to us. But it's our challenge to learn how to evolve and grow to be able to open to those experiences. And we get a taste. People get tastes, and you never forget it. If you have a taste of a unity experience or you have a taste of a mystical experience, people never forget them, and they say, wow, it would be lovely to be in that place all the time.
So, we have a Christ consciousness and a Buddha consciousness, you're saying.
Sure.
And I see that, and thank you so much. So everyone else can see it, too, on page 257. If you get the book Chrysalis, Crisis, by Dr. Frank Pisciutti, Pasciuti. Thank you so much, Dr. Frank Pisciutti. And this is Dr. Duffy Spencer saying goodbye for now and wishing you great relationships.